All right, I think we'll get started. Hello, welcome. It's good to see you all. All right, so this is the focus session on G.K. Chesterton. So make sure you're where you wanted to be, and you don't realize, oh crap, I didn't want to go to that one. I wanted to be somewhere else, which you probably do. You will want to be somewhere else in about 5 minutes. You'll regret your choice. But for now, I've got you. So the title of my talk is The Flag of the World, G.K. Chesterton on the value of patriotism, localism, and nationalism. That's what we'll be doing. But before I forget, an advertisement for the Spring Arbor G.K. Chesterton Society, which meets once a month. And our first meeting is going to be February 26th, just like a week and a half at 7 p.m. in White Library. You should come. We just sit around and read Chesterton and talk about it and laugh and have a good time. That's literally all that it is. It is nothing more than that. It requires exactly zero preparation beforehand. So 7 p.m. on the 26th, there's my advertisement. Okay. All right. So Chesterton took two separate trips to the United States, one in 1920, and one again in about 1930. And his reflections on his first visit were collected and published under the title, What I Saw in America. A bunch of different articles he wrote, which were published here and there, all collected. Okay, so he begins that book with an account of his trip to the U.S. Embassy in England to get his passport and the visa papers and everything he needed for his trip to the United States. And so I just want to read you his recounting of that event, because it's quite good. So this is what he says in the beginning of this book. I've always found Americans by far the politest people in the world. They put in my hands a form to be filled up. To all appearance, like other forms I had filled up in other passport offices. He traveled a good deal. But in reality, it was very different from any form I'd ever filled up in my life. One of the questions on the paper was, are you an anarchist? To which a detached philosopher would naturally feel inclined to answer, what the devil has that to do with you? Are you an atheist? Along with some playful efforts to cross-examine the official about what constitutes an arche in Greek. Then there was the question, are you in favor of subverting the government of the United States by force? Against this I should write, I prefer to answer that question at the end of my tour and not at the beginning. The inquisitor, in his more than morbid curiosity, had then written down, are you a polygamist? The answer to this is, no such luck. Or, not such a fool, according to our experience of the other sex. But among the many things that amused me most, to the point of treating the form thus disrespectfully, the most amusing was the thought of the ruthless outlaw who should be compelled to answer respectfully. I like to think of the foreign desperado seeking to slip into America with official papers under official protection and sitting down to write with a beautiful gravity, I'm an anarchist, I hate you all and wish to destroy you. Or, I intend to subvert the government of the United States by force as soon as possible, sticking the long sheath knife in my left trouser pocket and to Mr. Harding at the earliest opportunity. Or again, yes, I'm a polygamist all right, and my 47 wives are accompanying me on the voyage disguised as secretaries. There seems to be, he says, a certain simplicity of mind about these answers, and it's reassuring to know that anarchists and polygamists are so pure and good that the police only have to ask them questions, and they are certain to tell no lies. Which is great. So he begins his fascinating reflections on the United States. And I'm going to completely ignore those reflections for the rest of this talk. If you want to hear more about that, you should go read his book, What I Saw in America. But instead, in very bad speech-making manners, I'm going to begin this talk by saying something about my focus talk last year, which some of you had the misfortune to attend. And it offered a defense of the amateur. If you remember, you probably don't. The amateur, we discovered, was in essence a lover. That's, after all, the root of the word. We discussed why the really important parts of life, falling in love, raising children, etc., needed to be done by amateurs rather than by specialists or professionals. We know that, right? We all recognize that professional lover is just a fancy title for prostitute. Right? And being a professional parent just sounds terrible. That sounds immediately awful, right? You get that. So I want to start my talk this year from a similar point, which is this. Our focus theme asks us the following question. How do we understand our country, given both its great accomplishments and its sometimes messy reality? That's a good question, and one that's worth our attention, I think. And if you just do a quick scan of titles for the sessions this week, I think you'll discover very quickly that the balance appears to lie with naming the messy realities of our country. There are a lot of talks about this, particularly the messy realities of being both a citizen in the city of God and a citizen in the city of the United States of America. And that kind of critique is good. It's a good thing to do, and I'm not knocking what everybody else is doing. Do hear me there. I'm really not, this is not contrary. In fact, I don't think anything I say here is necessarily contrary to any of the points that the other speakers have made. I'm guessing there. I haven't been to all the talks. But I think that such critiques sometimes lead to an unintended error. In naming the messy realities, we come to disparage and distance ourselves from the country in which we live. The problem is that in our critique of nationalism and patriotism, we risk throwing out the fundamental importance of place and home. Dissatisfied with our country, we become cosmopolitans in the worst sense of the word. Citizens of the global village, which is exactly nowhere, and therefore requires nothing of us. Chesterton has a great poem on this global village and why it's so easy and so empty. It's short. I'll read it to you. Here it is. It's called The World State. It imagines the citizen of this global village. Oh, how I love humanity with a love so pure and Pringlish, and how I hate the horrid French who never shall be English. The international idea, the largest and the clearest, is welding all the nations now, except the one that's nearest. This compromise has long been known, this scheme of partial pardons, in ethical societies and small suburban gardens. The villas and the chapels where I learned with little labor the way to love my fellow man and hate my next door neighbor. It's easy to love the world. It's really hard to love Walter, the grouchy old man who lives next door. That requires a lot more effort. And I think in our critique, we're sometimes tempted to reject our nation, to wash our hands and say, well, it's pretty screwed up, so done with that. But I think that's a bad idea. Are there problems with nationalism? Of course there are problems. Are there dangers in patriotism? Of course there are. Is our current situation a dangerous cocktail of 3 parts religious fervor to 1 part national pride, shaken, stirred, and muddled beyond comprehension? Yes, it is. But, and you knew there was a but coming, but belonging to a place is a fundamental fact of being human. You can't be born nowhere. It's a simple fact that the natural human thing is to love the place where we're born. Just like the natural and normal thing is for parents to love their children. Are there exceptions to that? Of course there are, but we recognize that's not natural. Read any ancient literature and you'll discover very quickly that the human thing is to have a home and to be inextricably enmeshed in it and to love it. Odysseus can't really be himself outside Ithaca, and the whole point of Aeneas' labors and sacrifices are to found a home for his gods and for his son. So my thesis today is this, that before we name the messy realities or celebrate the successes, which I think we ought to do, but before we do that, we need first to start with love. We don't love the United States of America because it's beautiful. We don't love it because it's great. We love it because it's our home. And that's where we have to start from, I think. I'm going to argue that we ought to think of America from our homes out. That our loyalty is primal and fundamental and based on the smallness, not the bigness of our country. And it certainly isn't based on the goodness or badness of our country. Ought we to praise our nation? Yes, within reason. Ought we to critique our nation? Yes, with reason. But we can't do either of those things well unless we first love it without any reasons at all. Our revolution has to come from love. So, I'm just summarizing Chesterton and Orthodoxy, so I'll quit the second-rate summary and just read you what he says. This is from a chapter titled The Flag of the World. And in that chapter, Chesterton lays out this binary of optimism and pessimism. The optimist, he says, the optimist argues that he looks at the world or at his country and he thinks that everything is good about the world or about his country except the pessimist. And the pessimist looks at his world or at his country and thinks that everything is wrong about it except himself. And for the purposes of this focus week, I think that optimism maps easily. It's a crude kind of mapping, but it'll work. To those for whom the success of our nation, those successes so far outweigh the problems as to make the problems non-issues. Like, yeah, maybe there's bad stuff, but why are you on about that? There's way more good stuff than there is bad stuff. And likewise, there's another camp for whom the messy realities are so messy and awful that whatever successes there may have been are not really successes and certainly not worth the cost. But this either-or approach misunderstands our real situation in the world. Here's Chesterton, I'm quoting from Orthodoxy now. This is a deep mistake in the alternative of the optimist and the pessimist. The assumption of it is that a man criticizes this world as if he were house hunting, as if he were being shown over a new suite of apartments. If a man came to this world from some other world, in full possession of his powers, he might discuss whether the advantage of midsummer woods made up for the disadvantage of mad dogs. Just as a man looking for lodgings might balance the presence of a telescope against the absence of a sea view. But no man is in that position. A man belongs to this world before he begins to ask if it's nice to belong to it. So we're not in a position to choose. Instead, Chesterton argues that our loyalty to the world and to our places in the world is much more like patriotism because it's irrational. The real lover of his country loves it in spite of both its successes and its failures. So if we're to truly love our homes, we need a love not based on reasons for or against. We need a love not based on reasons at all. We need an irrational loyalty, a commitment which is prior to and deeper than reason. And Chesterton imagines what this kind of irrational love might produce. So I'm going to give you another long quote. And I've substituted here Michigan places for his London places because we don't get his London references. So this is just a quote. I've just changed the names. Here's what he says. Quote, "Let us suppose we are confronted with a desperate thing, say Flint. If we think what is really best for Flint, we shall find the thread of thought leads us to the throne of the mystic and the arbitrary, because it's not enough for a man to disapprove of Flint. In that case, he will merely cut his throat or move to Grand Rapids. Nor certainly is it enough, to disapprove of Flint. It's certainly not enough for a man to approve of Flint either, for then it will remain Flint, which would be awful. The only way out of it seems to be for somebody to love Flint. To love it with a transcendental tie and without any earthly reason. If there arose a man who loved Flint, then Flint would rise into ivory towers and golden pinnacles. Flint would attire herself as a woman does when she's loved. For decoration is not given to hide horrible things, but to decorate things already adorable. A mother does not give her child a blue bow because he's so ugly without it. A lover does not give a girl a necklace to hide her neck. If men loved Flint as mothers love their children because it is theirs, Flint in a year or two might be fairer than Florence." And this, Chesterton concludes, is exactly what happened with the great cities of the world. He says that men did not love Rome because she was great. Rome was great because men had loved her. Now, as recently as last year, that quote about Rome could be found gracing the halls of Andrews 1 South. It may be there. Is anybody from we have any 1 South people? Is it still there? No, it's been gone, alas. Oh well, that's okay. But for this quote, which I loved when it was there, we should substitute for Rome, we should substitute our homes. Right? We don't love Spring Arbor because she's great. If Spring Arbor is great, it's because our predecessors here have loved her. 1 South is great because her residents have loved her enough to glorify her with events like the Salon de Refuse. Now that sounds funny, right? That sounds strange to talk about the greatness of Spring Arbor and the glory of 1 South. It just sounds kind of silly. It doesn't sound silly for Rome. Oh yeah, Rome. Rome's important. Rome's big. Rome's fancy. We can imagine the greatness of Rome, but we can't imagine the greatness of Flint. That just sounds ridiculous to us. And that, I submit to you, is our problem. In his talk on Monday night, which hopefully some of you were at, it was excellent, William Cavanaugh suggested that part of the problem is the abstraction we all suffer from with regard to our country. With the growth of the modern nation state, our focus shifts from the village, from the home, to something much larger and more theoretical. And so we tend to begin our thinking not from neighborhoods, but from the metropolis. This is evident on just a moment's reflection. When I say, just right now, when I say think of the United States, Spring Arbor doesn't pop into your head. I don't know why not. It's as constitutive a part of the United States as anywhere else. It's as equally as much the United States as anywhere else. But we don't think about that. We don't start from where we are. If I say Michigan, a vision of Lowell Hall doesn't arise before your mind's eye. Again, why not? Part of the problem, there are probably many problems. Part of the problem, I think, is the media age that we live in. Whatever news outlet you choose, I don't care where, they always and only work at a federal level, which seems to me backwards. You and I can't do anything at a federal level except get self-righteously angry and then tweet about it and then congratulate ourselves that at least we care and have taken a stand against injustice. So, I think we would all do well to begin thinking of the United States from our homes out. As a first step, an easy step to my mind, perhaps we could just begin to take state pride much more seriously. I don't understand why people are so bothered by Texans and Texas pride. I lived there for 6 years. Except that maybe all the people who are bothered by it have no thriving tradition of their own to fall back on in their state. So surely the solution is not for Texans to love Texas less, but for all of us to love Michigan and Indiana and Ohio more. And that's not hard to do, right? Like Texas was its own country before joining the Union. Great, that's good. That's cool, right? We're not going to equal that. But fair enough. But our flag in Michigan beats the Texas state flag all hollow. Have you looked at our Michigan flag? I discovered this yesterday. I grew up in Kansas. I don't know. I mean, I knew it was there, and I knew it had like some deer on it, but I'm about to show you a picture of our state flag. There are moments when life is a miracle. Clearly, like there's no other evidence. I just sat there for a while yesterday afternoon. I found this yesterday afternoon, and we have an angry elk and a moose on our flag. Here they are. Let me maybe this will work. Oh, the computer died. I'm back. They're right there, I promise. There they are. Look at that. You can't see it. Where are the lights? Here are the lights. Maybe I'll shut off everything. There we are. Look at this. Okay, you can imagine the Texas state flag, right? It's got this little star. It's got 3 colors. It's kind of triangular and squarish at the same time. We have an elk and a moose. That's better than any star. We have an actual star on our flag, the sun, as it's rising over this lovely lake. There's a guy waving. He wants you to come. We've got an eagle, and you can't see it, but the eagle is clutching olive branch and arrows. Like Homer is rejoicing in his grave. We have the best state motto ever. Our state motto, Si quaris peninsulam ammonium circumspice. This is our state motto. If you seek a pleasant peninsula, look about you. Mottos are supposed to be terse. Mottos are direct, right? They're short. This is conversational. Kansas's motto, when I grew up with, is ad astra per aspera, to the stars through difficulty, right? That's a good, hearty pioneer sort of motto, right? That's the life sucks, but hang in there and go plow some fields motto. But this is like, hey, if you're in the mood, you know, it starts with a hypothetical. If this is what you're looking for, it's pretty nice. This flag makes my heart go. When I found this, I thought, why am I even giving a talk? We should just talk about this flag. This is all of it. This is the whole thing right here. Okay, so we got 3 Latin phrases there. E pluribus unum. You all know that one. Out of many, one. There's the heart of my argument right there. We spend all our time thinking about the one. We don't spend any time thinking about the many and what those many might be. And until we know what those are, we have no idea how they might make one. We just skip the many and go straight to the one. To Abor, below that, I will defend. Ah, man, that's another speech. I don't have time to talk about all that. If you want that, read Chesterton. And then this last one, if you want somewhere lovely, just open your eyes and look around you. That's it. That's my argument. How many of us have really looked at where we live? Just look around you. Just look, says our flag. So, here's my thesis. The smaller we can get in our imaginations, the better. The more limited and particular our loves can be, the better able we will be to love our country as a whole. And the greatest paradox is that the more limited we are, the deeper and broader our vision will be. I've told you all that who are writing papers for me. Some of you are writing papers for me right now. And I tell you, you don't believe me, but I tell you, the more narrow and particular your focus is, the more you discover there is to say. This principle is at the heart of Mother Teresa's famous saying. Right? You've heard this one before. Do small things with great love. The problem is that we don't want to do small things. Small things sound boring. Small is common. If I say, would you rather be small or great? You don't want to say small. It takes some courage to say small. We worship at the altar of greatness. We spend a lot of time thinking about who is the greatest of all time. Okay, fine. At one level, of course we do. That's human. We want heroes, and we want to be the hero. That's just a basic human desire. I'm not liking that. So have all peoples ever. But by the strange magic of the gospel, the way up becomes the way down. If we want to save our lives, we have to lose them. And the God hero, the wonder counselor, is transmuted into a tiny baby in a feedlot. And that's about as small as you can get. So, in the second part of this talk, that was part one. In the second part, I want to discuss the importance of limits in helping us to do this. If we have to start with love for our particular places, how might limits help us to do that? We don't like limits. Limits are the things, right? Your life can be unlimited, so your cell phone company tells you. Or your life should be unlimited. Not even can, it should. Okay, so limits. Let's just talk about limits. And to do this, I want to talk a lot about Chesterton's first published novel, The Napoleon of Notting Hill. So I'll talk about limits for a little bit, and then we'll get to that novel. And if you get really bored, which is likely, just look at the flag. And that's just quintessentially not boring. Okay. So limits. Limits can help us to imagine the smallness of our homes as the starting point for our love of our town, our county, our state, our nation. Limits here are characteristics of form, the arrangement of parts which make a thing what it is and not some other thing. Limits are the edges of form, the outline which separates one thing from another. Right? You can tell where I stop and this podium starts. They're clear limits. The term is centrally connected then with questions of particularity, of distinct influences, of distinct materials, of composition and history, of what makes a thing irreducibly unique in itself. It also has spatial context, the marker of a division between places. And finally, for Chesterton, the idea of limits retains its sense of smallness and particularity, but for him those are virtues rather than vices. The home provides the central locus of the distinct, the bounded, and the small in Chesterton's thought. And he claims in his autobiography that the whole of his thought, all of his work, grew out of people's failure to recognize the value, the splendor of the particular places in which they lived. Quote, "Everything I have done and thought grew out of that original problem. It was the problem of how men could be made to realize the wonder and splendor of being alive in environments which their own daily criticism treated as dead alive, which their imagination had left for dead. The solution that Chesterton offers to this problem is the limited imagination. That is, the imagination which is able to regard the smallness of the home as stimulating rather than stifling. He argues that this attention to limits is at the heart of the imagination since, quote, the imagination deals with an image, and an image is in its nature a thing that has an outline and therefore a limit. This fact is most evident in children who are, he says, positively in love with limits, who use their imaginations to invent imaginary limits. The imagination for Chesterton finds its most natural employment in taking up the limits and particulars of the home and the local. And often this reimagining takes place in the city in Chesterton's fiction, not out in some forest, not on a lovely peninsula with elk and deer, or moose rather, but rather in the modern city, which rather than viewing as kind of anathema to the fairy tale sensibility that he develops, Chesterton finds the forms of the modern city enchanted and enchanting. So, to trace out what that might look like practically, that's all from 20,000 feet. That's all abstract. That's not particular or limited. So, I will limit myself now to talking about the Napoleon of Notting Hill as a good example of how he works this out and what it might look like to have this kind of limited imagination. The story is centrally concerned with the relationship between limits, form, and the home. And this is true even on the plot level of the novel, which is this. A bunch of rich people in London, a bunch of businessmen, have decided to put in a big highway. And in order to put in this highway, they got to bulldoze a tiny little neighborhood. They've bulldozed lots of neighborhoods. There's one left that has to be bulldozed. They can connect the highway. Commerce can happen. And whether or not the little street called Pump Street gets bulldozed is the conflict of the novel. Because everybody says yes except for one person. So whether that street is going to retain its small limited form or be bulldozed for the cross-city thoroughfare is the conflict of the novel. The novel's set in 1984, which is why Orwell set his 1984 in 1984 in direct reply to Chesterton's novel. But unlike Orwell's Dark Prophecy, the London of Napoleon of Notting Hill is about like its 1904 counterpart. Nothing has changed, really. Londoners have given themselves over to an evolutionary theory of development, which says that all growth must be slow and natural. And so, with a world devoid of any imaginative possibility or romance, people just go about their daily business because there's no reason to do anything else. Into this imaginatively stifling London enters one of the two main characters, Oberon Quinn, who recognizes the absurdity of this world and refuses to surrender his humor. And he does this by just making fun of everybody and everything. All he does is mock. But this humor is his desperate defense to ward off the boredom of nihilism. He tells his friend, who's really his frenemy, I suppose, that his soul has been emptied of all pleasures but folly, and that he possesses the madness of an utterly idle man. He just has nothing left to do. He could care less. He's just bored and wants a joke. And the way they decide to do kingship in this system, because it doesn't really matter who rules, is to just do it by lottery. They just pick a name out of a hat, and you're king. And it happens to be Oberon who's elected as king, which they didn't anticipate. So once he's king, he exercises his creative powers. He's an artist, and he makes up this thing called the Charter of Cities, which is this fabricated, forged document that he makes seem like it's this great medieval thing. He just makes it up. And it's a proclamation which attempts to return London to its medieval boroughs, replete with harbingers and heraldry. It's a joke, but it's his attempt to respond to the inhuman deadness of the modern industrial political leviathan. So he requires everybody who comes in to have an audience with him to dress up in medieval costumes and to have all these ridiculously long titles, and to remember that it's a Tuesday in the month of February in an odd year, so you have to crawl on all fours to talk to him. Or he invents pointless rules. And he might not believe a word of that. He knows it's all made up, but he thinks it's an excellent exercise in flummoxing the bureaucrats and plutocrats who control the city. And the imaginary boundaries and limits he devises, they build all these walls between the two parts of the city. Even though they begin as mere moonshine, they're better than the insidious moonshine of the plutocrats of Buck and Barker with their concern for the interests of the public. Second main character enters, Adam Wayne, who takes it all seriously. He doesn't recognize that it's a joke. He's grown up in Notting Hill, this tiny little street they're about to bulldoze, and he's never been anywhere in the world but London. And so he has the proper limited vision which allows him to see his home for what it is, a sacred wonderland of lamps and bricks and living persons. He literally has never been anywhere outside London, ever. He got sick when he was young, so he never went to the sea. He spent his whole childhood and early adulthood in London. And this narrowness of experience allows him to see the true mysteries. For Wayne, his name's Adam Wayne, no distinction exists between the natural light of the sun and the artificial illumination of the gaslights. Quote, he saw the street lamps as things quite eternal as the stars. The two fires were mingled. He was a natural mystic, perhaps the first to realize how often the boundary of fairyland runs through a crowded city. End quote. And this made-up charter of cities provides him a structure in which to fully realize his vision of the poetry and pageantry of the city. With the king's proclamation of the individuality of each borough, Wayne can make his whole life the poem that he doesn't have the skill to write. And so he pursues with single-minded determination the fulfillment of this made-up, funny, ridiculous, farcical charter of cities. Now, this isn't confusion on his part. He doesn't fail to distinguish between nature and culture as much as he realizes that some mystery undergirds them both. That the city and the woods are alike enchanted. At the heart of his limited vision is a recognition of the value of limits and particularity. And the first confession and the best image of this comes from a character who dies after 5 pages in the novel, because he's old. Yeah, he's sweet. The president of Nicaragua, who cherishes his country, but he expresses that love in concrete ways. He cuts his own arm so that he can have a little bit of blood to go with some yellow poster he found to make the flag of Nicaragua. And he agrees that Nicaragua is an idea, brilliant, a burning thought, but that idea is incarnated everywhere around him. He says, wherever there is a field of marigold and the red cloak of an old woman, this yellow and red, there is Nicaragua. Wherever there is a field of poppies and a yellow patch of sand, there is Nicaragua. Wherever there is a lemon and a red sunset, there is my country. It's incarnated in the particulars of the physical world, and it finds expression everywhere. Likewise, Wayne's small little neighborhood, it's just a dirty little side street. This is not a grand and glorious part of town. It's poor and old. But it bears incredible significance because it's where the most important stuff in the world happens. Birth, marriage, love, death. And with his limited field of vision, Wayne can see that his own Pump Street is not a thing for mockery or disdain, but a place to be celebrated and praised. He says, these little gardens where we told our loves, these streets where we brought our dead, why should they be commonplace? Why should they be absurd? Why should any be able to raise a laugh by saying the cause of Notting Hill? Notting Hill where thousands of immortal spirits blaze with alternate hope and fear. Smallness of scale doesn't mean unimportant. Quite the opposite. The most important and eternal questions, the questions of the soul, can be found in any alley or side street. And if the climax of human drama can be decided in alleyways, so too the whole of human drama can be found in miniature in every home and neighborhood. This is true on a political and economic level as well as on a spiritual one. So Wayne finds in Pump Street, once they decide to defend it, all that's needed for a city under siege. A grocery for their garrison and supply. There's an antique store stocked with a bunch of old weapons. There's a chemist, and they say that can deal with all the diseases that are sure to break out. And there's a toy and paper shop, which is going to give them the materials for their press. His recognition of the importance of limits allows him to see the possibilities inherent in the neighborhood. With his imagination as a lens, Wayne can see the true value of the street, its irreducible uniqueness, whereas the financiers of the road cannot imagine any other value than money. They only assume that when they offer him, $30 million for a street that's worth maybe $1 million, and he rejects that, they can only imagine that he's crazy. They can't imagine loving something like that because their only value is monetary. So the primary conflict in the novel then is generated by the clash between this industrial economy, which refuses to imagine limits, and the local economy, which does. Against this bulldozing, against this buying up of properties and acquiring rights to things and destroying lots of other neighborhoods, Adam Wayne rallies the shopkeepers of Pump Street, a grocer, a chemist, a barber, and an antique shop owner. And these shops, which he thinks are the very center of Pump Street, and they are, they're all small, they all sit side by side. Their owners are also the proprietors and primary employees. And it's the shopkeepers' defense of their own livelihoods that enables the defense of the whole neighborhood. Okay, so what I'm saying is this. His ability to imagine the value of limits, particularly limits of his home, leads him to defend Notting Hill. His patriotism stems from his love of the particulars. Wayne knows this fact. The narrator tells us, quote, "The patriot never, under any circumstances, never boasts of the largeness of his country, but always, and of necessity, boasts of the smallness of it." And his ability to defend the town successfully, which he does, with just a few people against the thousands and thousands of London soldiers. The success of his military campaign, and this is the best part of the novel, I think, lies in his ability to pay attention to the actual details of the neighborhood. The other people just assume that with thousands of people they can crush them, and it doesn't matter. But Wayne pays attention to the horses, the street lights, the water tower. So commandeering all the cabs in the city gives them a cavalry. Disabling the power station reduces the opponents to slaughtering each other in the dark because they don't know the landscape. Because he knows the limits, the boundaries, characteristics, the particular places where they're fighting, he's able to conquer the superior forces. Ultimately, he's able to force his enemies to surrender because he captures the water tower on top of the hill. And then when they don't realize what he's doing until when the forces are directly below them, he can flood them all out if they don't agree to surrender. Moreover, his love of Notting Hill enables him to recognize the value of other places and the heroism of the other patriots. He celebrates his enemies' burgeoning pride in their own neighborhoods. When in the midst of battle around the water tower, a man cries out, "Bayswater forever," one of the towns of the enemies. He takes up the cry and says, "Bayswater forever, we've taught our enemies patriotism." Indeed, his whole argument about the sanctity of Notting Hill is predicated on the fact that all of his enemies could, and to his mind should, make the same claims about their own neighborhoods. Which is... This is a particular problem, I think, for us, because we think we're the best and we're the greatest, and we have a hard time imagining the patriotism of others. Right? But we want Poland to be as fiercely happy about being Polish as we are about being Americans. Because he regards his own home as sacred, Wayne can imagine the similar feelings which others have toward their homes. And he rejoices when his enemies shed their reductive, money-driven visions, begin to imagine the significance of their own homes. Okay. Wrapping it up then. The universality of Notting Hill, its ability to inspire a whole city, a whole civilization in the novel, begins in its particularity. This is the paradox of limits that Chesterton celebrates. He says, when a man declares one spot to be everything to him, then the whole world is really given to him. Wayne says that the moment a child in a garden declares this tree to be all I have, that moment its roots take hold on hell and its branches on the stars. And Chesterton makes the same point in Heretics when he argues that Rudyard Kipling's emphasis on seeing the world in order to know it, you can't know the world unless you've been out and traveled about and seen it. Kipling says, what can they know of England who only England know? What can they know of England who only England know? Chesterton says that results, in the end, not in love or wonder, but in boredom. Kipling, Chesterton argues, is proof of this fact because he thinks England's a place you can go from and come from. Not true, says Chesterton. We really know when we love a place is that the moment we are rooted in a place, the place vanishes. We live like a tree with the whole strength of the universe. Chesterton concludes that article on Kipling by reflecting on the importance of limits. He says this, the man standing in his own kitchen garden with fairyland at the gate is the man with large ideas. From this splendid parochialism, such a man can watch motor car civilization going its triumphant way, outstripping time, consuming space, seeing all and seeing nothing, roaring on at last to capture the solar system only to find the sun cockney and the stars suburban. Okay, so what I'm saying is this. I'll conclude with this. Then you can ask me all kinds of questions. Through his recognition of the value of limits, Wayne celebrates the gratuitous character of his own home and leads others to view their places in similar ways. That's a move I think we should follow. Wayne realizes the paradoxical truth that the dedicatory poem at the beginning of the novel presents. This is the poem at the beginning. For every tiny town or place, God made the stars especially. The particular places in which we live, when we encounter them in their particularity, open up onto the universal and the infinite. It says elsewhere, heaven is everywhere at home. And if we were to fruitfully name both the successes and the messy realities of our country, that naming must come from love. A love which begins by celebrating the limits of the places we're from, which first looks about this pleasant peninsula on which we find ourselves, and delights in the miracle of existence in this particular place, and then, and only then, asks how we might best care for such a place and order it to human flourishing. Thank you. Okay, questions. We have a few minutes for questions. Yes, I was waiting for you, Jeff. Good. Is a city-state. Like if yeah. Okay, so maybe we could, is a state? I don't know. I don't have an easy answer to that question. I guess my initial answer would be this. If I were to sit down and draw it out, right? If I happen to be God or the founding fathers or whoever else, and could just be do whatever I want? No, I think that's the bigness causes lots of problems. But the case is that I can't. I'm not. That's not the situation in which I find myself. That makes sense? Like, so ideally, no. It seems problematic. Maybe, I don't know. Well, no, I do know. It is problematic. I don't know what the solution is. But I don't know that breaking it up and us, all our 50 states going our own ways is feasible. I don't know. Maybe it would be. I mean, that wouldn't be necessarily. I have no good answer to your question, other than to say, yeah, clearly it's problematic, but it's what we've got, and I don't think. If our critique of that comes out of our love for our places and our real desire to do what's best for our places and for other places, and that's its only desire, fine. But I think, and this is what Chesterton says, the people who are the pessimists, he says, because he has no problem critiquing the world and thinking that we need revolution. Most of his novels have giant revolutions in them, where society is just completely upset. But he says most of the people who point out how bad it is really enjoy the fact that it's that bad. They're happy about it. Right? The United States is ruined, and they're kind of glad that it's so. And that he has a real problem with. And so that's, I suppose that's, I don't know. That's a long, stumbling non-answer. Yeah. Sure. Yes. Of course. Like I don't know. I mean, I'm as tempted to listen to national politics as you all are. But what's the point? Like, who cares? 10% of me thinks that it matters. But the other 90% thinks that, well, you spend a lot of mental energy running around in circles thinking it matters. And you have exactly zero impact. So, yes, if you take anything out of this, it would be to vote in local elections and forget about national elections. That's an easy thing to start doing. Okay. Yes, exactly so. And you could, and that's the right place, not just to critique the messy realities, but to celebrate the successes too, the things that are great, and they are there. I don't think it's bad things, 72, good things, nothing. But that the problem is, right, that on the other side, and this is why I think we recognize the danger. Most of the talks this week are critiquing. Here are the problems, which is good because by and large we kind of drink the Kool-Aid that says this is great, this is the best place ever. We're God's chosen nation. And that's problematic for a whole host of other reasons that a lot of people have done a good job of talking about. So if we want to name the successes rightly and the failures rightly, you got to start from love of the small in particular. Yes, with a yes with an asterisk. Sure. Of course. Lots of us have moved around. How many of you have moved more than 3 times in your life? Yeah. Okay. Almost half of us. How many of you think you will probably move more than 3 times in your life? All of us. And that actually might be problematic. We're a pretty mobile civilization. Chesterton says that, where is it? It might be in Orthodoxy, that people used to say, a rolling stone gathers no moss, as a celebration of moving about. They said the point of this whole analogy, though, the funny thing about it is that a stone's a dead thing, right? The moss is actually alive. The stone's not. I don't know. Yeah, so could you just focus on the people? Sure. Is that important? Yes. But I do, and this is a separate talk, and this is Jeff is more eloquent on this than I. But I do think that our mobility is a serious problem. Because at the end, we kind of regard all places the same. Which causes a lot of problems. Other questions? Yeah. Okay. Yes. At one level, that's simply true. How many of you have been to other countries? Right? Spring Arbor thinks that's a good thing. We require you to do it. So, at one level, yes, that's a good thing. At a second level, I think that what you learned, a lot of what you learned when you were gone was not about the other country. It was about here. Right? Being somewhere else taught you the most about being here. Right? In 3 weeks in India, you're going to really learn the essence of India? Probably not. But you are going to have, all of a sudden, a dislocation from what you know, and to be in a completely different orbit, and say, oh, I never realized all these things about the United States before, about home. So that's the second level. And at the third level, the most important things you don't travel at all for. The really important stuff. The central and eternal questions are what you deal with in your home, with your family. And in fact, in doing that, you're actually like everybody else, right? When you're a tourist, when you become a tourist or a traveler, you go down a step in terms of, and then I'm just, again, all I know how to do is summarize Chesterton, so that's all I'm doing. This is all just second-rate summary, and if you really want it said better, go read them. But his basic point is that when we're with the man on his farm, right, with his family, going to church every Sunday, is encountering the real eternal questions of life. When you go out and travel about and see everything else removed, that's fine and good, but that's a secondary thing. So insofar as you want to deal with the real hard things in life, you got to do it at home. Yeah, okay. It's a good question. Yes, Olivia.
Following another one of G.K. Chesterton's books, the traveling about helps appreciate the Northland.
Hopefully. That's hopefully, again, what happens when we go abroad. That certainly is what happens in his novel Man Alive, which some of you read with me.
That's what I was referencing.
Yeah. Yeah, so hopefully it does. It ought to. Okay. Last question. Going once. You again. Yes.
Are you a polygamist?
Am I a polygamist? No. No, I'm not. I wonder if am I an anarchist? No, certainly not. Do I wish to subvert the government of the United States by force?
Yes.
Only if they take away the Michigan flag. All right, thank you all. Go have lunch. Go to the afternoon sessions.